Emma stood at the edge of the grand garden, the late afternoon sun casting a warm golden glow over the beautifully decorated wedding altar. The soft murmur of the guests hushed as they waited for the ceremony to begin. She adjusted the delicate lace of her gown, trying to steady the fluttering in her chest. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, the moment she had dreamed of for years. Yet deep inside, a quiet unease settled like a shadow she couldn't shake. Her fiancé, James, had been strangely distant all morning. He smiled politely at their guests, but there was a coldness behind his eyes that made Emma's heart skip uncomfortably. She glanced toward the entrance, where he was supposed to appear any moment. The music started, soft and sweet, and the first few guests turned to look. Emma took a deep breath and reminded herself to trust in the love they had built, despite the gnawing worry. James stood just behind the heavy velvet curtain that separated the garden from a preparation room. His hands were clammy, gripping his tuxedo jacket as though it could anchor him to reality. His phone buzzed again, a sharp vibration cutting through the quiet. He pulled it from his pocket and stared at the message on the screen. It was a letter from his family's lawyer, a confirmation of financial ruin that no one else yet knew. The estate, the investments, even the family business had collapsed. Everything James had worked for, everything Emma believed in, was gone in an instant. The weight of the truth crushed him. How could he face her now? How could he stand before their families and friends and promise her a future he couldn't afford to give? The man Emma was about to marry was no longer the man she thought he was. He was broken, desperate, and scared. And yet, the ceremony was moments away. There was no time to change what had been planned for months. In the crowd, Emma's closest friends whispered, sensing the tension. Her best friend, Sarah, caught Emma's eye and gave a small, reassuring smile. But even Sarah's face was lined with concern. Emma's mother clutched her hand tightly, her own eyes reflecting years of hopes and dreams for her daughter's happiness. The air was thick with expectation, but beneath the surface, fear rippled silently. Suddenly, a sleek black car pulled up to the estate's driveway. It was unexpected. There had been no mention of any special guests arriving late. The crowd turned to watch as a tall man stepped out. He wore a tailored tuxedo, his posture calm and confident. Whispers spread through the guests like wildfire. Who was this stranger? No one recognized him immediately, but the name on the invitation inside the car was enough to stop the conversation. Alexander. Alexander was a billionaire, a man of mystery and immense influence, known more for his business acumen than for social appearances. His presence at the wedding was a shock to everyone, especially Emma, who had never met him before. He moved toward the entrance with purpose, avoiding the questions swirling in the crowd. Behind the curtains, James felt the panic rise inside him. He knew he couldn't go through with the ceremony, but he also knew there was no easy way out. His mind raced, searching for a solution, for a way to protect Emma from the ruin he now carried like a hidden poison. Then, almost as if fate had intervened, Alexander appeared beside him. Their eyes met, and in that brief moment, a silent understanding passed between them. Alexander spoke quietly, offering a lifeline James hadn't dared to imagine. If James could no longer be the groom, Alexander would step in, wear his tuxedo, speak the vows, and shield Emma from the heartbreak that was about to unfold. It was an unimaginable request, but one born from compassion and a strange sense of duty. James hesitated, but then nodded, the weight of the decision settling over him like a shroud. Outside, Emma heard footsteps approaching and turned to see a man standing where James should have been. Confusion flickered across her face. Who was this man? Why was he here at her wedding, holding the vows meant for James? The ceremony began with a silence that felt heavier than the music playing softly around them. Alexander's voice rang out, steady and sincere, as he recited the promises that James could no longer make. Emma's heart raced, torn between disbelief and the faint hope that somehow this stranger might protect the love she still believed in. The day that was supposed to be perfect had changed forever, but the story was only just beginning. James sat alone in the small, dimly lit room, the muffled sounds of the wedding echoing faintly through the walls. His hands trembled as he stared at the crumpled letter in his lap. The words seemed to blur before his eyes, but the message was painfully clear. His family's empire was gone, swallowed up by debt and betrayal. Years of hard work, sacrifices, and dreams all erased in a single moment. He felt as if the ground beneath him had crumbled, leaving nothing but emptiness. He had kept the truth hidden from Emma, convinced that she deserved better than his ruined legacy. But now, as the minutes ticked closer to the ceremony, the weight of the secret suffocated him. How could he walk down that aisle and vow a future he could no longer provide? How could he ask Emma to trust a man who was falling apart? His phone buzzed again. Another message flashed on the screen, this time from his estranged father. The words were cold and unforgiving. "You're finished. The family name is yours no longer." James closed his eyes, swallowing back a bitter mix of shame and anger. The man he once looked up to had turned his back on him when he needed him most. Desperation pushed James to the edge. He paced the room, trying to steady his breathing, but the walls seemed to close in tighter with each passing second. Outside, the guests waited, blissfully unaware of the storm raging inside the groom's heart. Then the door creaked open, and Alexander stepped inside. Calm, composed, but carrying a presence that filled the room. James barely recognized the man who had offered to stand in for him just moments ago. But something in Alexander's eyes was different. There was no judgment there, only a quiet understanding. "I can't do this," James admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "Not today. Not like this. Emma deserves the truth, but I can't be the one to tell her." Alexander nodded slowly. "You're not the first to face a moment like this. Sometimes the truth can wait until the time is right." His voice was steady, almost comforting. "Let me help. For now, you step back. Let me carry this burden." James hesitated, torn between guilt and relief. Could he really trust a stranger with something so precious? The thought of Emma marrying someone else was almost unbearable, but the pain of going through with the wedding as planned was even worse. Meanwhile, Emma stood at the altar, eyes searching the crowd for James. Her heart beat faster with every passing second. The music swelled, signaling that the ceremony was about to begin. She tried to tell herself that everything was fine, but a quiet voice inside her whispered doubt. Where was James? Backstage, the wedding planner whispered urgently into her phone, trying to manage the chaos no one else could see. Alexander was already dressed in James's tuxedo, rehearsing the vows under his breath. He felt the weight of every promise, every hope, every shattered dream that came with this role. When Alexander stepped out to take his place, the crowd gasped softly. Emma's eyes widened in disbelief. The man standing before her was not the James she loved, but someone else entirely. The silence was thick, the air heavy with questions. Alexander's voice rang clear and steady as he began the vows. I promise to love you, to stand by you, in good times and bad. His words carried sincerity, but also a hint of sorrow, an unspoken plea for forgiveness from both Emma and himself. Emma struggled to hold back tears. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible situation unfolding before her. She wanted to run, to scream, to demand answers, but something in Alexander's eyes stopped her. There was no malice there, only a quiet hope that this moment could protect her from greater pain. As the ceremony ended, the guests applauded politely, unaware of the secret that had just been exchanged. Emma's closest friends gathered around, whispering theories and concerns. But Emma remained silent, her heart torn between confusion and a fragile thread of trust. Later, when the crowd had dispersed, Emma found herself alone with Alexander, the man who had stepped into her life at the most unexpected moment. She needed to understand why. Why had James disappeared? Why had Alexander taken his place? And most importantly, what did this mean for her future? Alexander met her gaze with steady eyes. "I did what I had to do," he said quietly. "Not to replace James, but to protect you from a truth that would have destroyed everything you believed in." Emma's world had shifted in ways she never imagined. The wedding she had planned for years had become something else entirely. A fragile beginning built on secrets, sacrifice, and the hope that love could still find a way through the shadows. The black car's tires crunched softly on the gravel as it pulled up to the grand estate. Guests glanced toward the unexpected arrival, whispers rippling through the crowd like a sudden breeze. Alexander stepped out, his posture composed and calm, eyes sharp and alert beneath a well-tailored tuxedo. No one expected him here, and no one knew why. Yet, his presence sent a subtle tremor through the day that had seemed so carefully planned. Inside the preparation room, Alexander adjusted his cufflinks, breathing deeply as he prepared to take on a role he had never imagined. He wasn't just a guest or a bystander. He was about to step into a life that wasn't his, carrying the weight of promises not his own. The silence around him was thick with unspoken questions and the gravity of the moment. He had never met Emma or James before today. His reputation was built on business deals and discreet philanthropy, not weddings or romantic entanglements. Yet, when James had called him in desperation, he hadn't hesitated. He knew what it meant to lose everything overnight, to watch a life crumble beneath you. Compassion stirred in him, quiet but fierce. Alexander glanced at the folded vow papers in his hand. They were James's words, written with hope and love, yet now carrying a strange new meaning. As he slipped on the tuxedo jacket, he felt the surreal weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. This wasn't just a performance. It was a chance to protect a woman who didn't yet know the truth. Meanwhile, Emma stood at the altar, trying to steady her racing heart. The music that once filled her with joy now felt like a countdown to uncertainty. Her eyes scanned the crowd, searching for James's familiar face. Instead, she found herself staring at a stranger who stepped forward with quiet confidence, taking James's place as if it was the most natural thing in the world. The guests exchanged puzzled glances. Some leaned toward each other, murmuring questions. The wedding planner's worried eyes met Alexander's steady gaze, but no one said a word aloud. The ceremony had to continue. The moment had to be salvaged. Alexander's voice was steady and calm as he began the vows. "Emma, I promise to stand by your side, to honor you and cherish you through whatever life brings." His words carried sincerity, but beneath them lay a secret burden. Every syllable was a promise made on behalf of another man, a promise he was determined to keep. Emma's gaze held a mixture of confusion, hurt, and something else she couldn't name. She fought the urge to question everything, to turn away and run from the stranger who had stepped into her life so suddenly. But beneath the shock, a flicker of trust began to grow. There was something in Alexander's eyes, something honest and real. As the ceremony progressed, the air was thick with unspoken tension. Guests watched, caught between curiosity and discomfort, sensing the strange gravity of the moment. The grand day they had all anticipated had become something fragile, teetering on the edge of revelation and heartbreak. After the vows, Alexander gently took Emma's hand. The crowd applauded politely, but Emma barely heard the sound. Her mind was spinning, trying to process what had just happened. Who was this man? Why had James disappeared? And what did this mean for the life she had planned? Later, away from the prying eyes, Alexander and Emma found a quiet corner of the estate. The air between them was charged with questions neither dared to ask aloud yet. Alexander broke the silence first. "James is facing something you don't know about," he said carefully. "Something that would change everything if you found out now." Emma's eyes searched his face, looking for answers, for truth, for any sign of deception. She wanted to believe him, but the uncertainty clawed at her heart. "Why did you agree to this?" she asked softly. "Why step in at the last minute, when this should have been his day?" Alexander's gaze softened. "Because sometimes protecting someone means carrying their burden for a while. Because I couldn't stand to see you hurt. And because, in a way, this isn't just about James or me. It's about what's right." Emma nodded slowly, realizing that the day she thought would mark the beginning of her happily ever after had instead opened a door to something far more complicated. The stranger who had become her stand-in groom held secrets, pain, and perhaps an unexpected kind of hope. As the sun dipped lower behind the estate, casting long shadows across the garden, Emma and Alexander stood together, two strangers bound by circumstance, facing a future that neither could predict. The story was far from over. James sat in a quiet room, the weight of his decision pressing down on him like a stone. The truth about his family's downfall was still fresh and raw, but the plan they had hatched with Alexander was the only way forward. He swallowed hard, knowing this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about protecting Emma from pain she didn't deserve. Alexander stood beside him, calm and collected. "You don't have to do this alone," he said quietly. "I'll take your place, just for now. We keep the ceremony intact, and you get time to figure out what comes next." James looked up, searching Alexander's face for doubt, hesitation, anything. But all he saw was steady resolve. It was a strange kind of kindness from a man who was a stranger until just hours ago. "Why would you do this?" James asked, voice barely above a whisper. Alexander shrugged lightly. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything in a heartbeat. And because sometimes the right thing isn't easy. You're protecting her. She deserves that much." The minutes ticked closer to the ceremony. James felt his heart pounding, a mix of relief and guilt swirling inside him. How could he ask Emma to trust him again? How could he face the consequences of this secret? Meanwhile, Emma waited at the altar, her mind spinning with questions. The man who had replaced James seemed sincere, but the shock was still fresh. She wanted answers, and soon. After the ceremony, Alexander pulled James aside. "We need a plan," he said. "We have to keep this quiet for now, but eventually Emma deserves the truth." James nodded, exhaustion in his eyes. "I don't know if I can face her like this. But you're right. She deserves honesty." The wedding guests began to mingle, blissfully unaware of the quiet storm behind the scenes. Alexander and James worked silently to navigate the impossible situation, knowing that one wrong move could shatter everything. In a quiet corner, Emma finally confronted Alexander. "Why did you take his place?" she demanded, voice trembling with emotion. Alexander met her gaze steadily. "Because he asked me to. Because sometimes love means sacrifice, even when it's not your own." Emma's heart ached with confusion. The man she had planned to marry was gone, replaced by a stranger carrying secrets. Yet in Alexander's eyes, she saw something genuine, a promise that this wasn't the end, but the beginning of a different kind of story. Days passed, and the truth lingered just out of reach. Emma found herself drawn to Alexander, not as a replacement, but as someone who had stepped into her life when she needed help most. Their conversations grew deeper, filled with quiet moments and unspoken understanding. James, meanwhile, disappeared into the shadows, grappling with the ruin of his family and the pain of losing the woman he loved in a way he never expected. Alexander made sure Emma was protected, shielding her from the harsh realities for as long as possible. But even he knew the truth could not stay hidden forever. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Alexander sat with Emma in the quiet garden. "There's more you need to know," he said softly. "But I promise, I'll be here when you're ready." Emma looked at him, feeling the fragile threads of trust begin to weave between them. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time since the wedding, she felt a flicker of hope. Sometimes love didn't come as expected. It arrived through sacrifice, honesty, and the courage to face the truth together. And maybe, just maybe, that was the kind of love worth fighting for. Emma stared out the window of her childhood home, the fading light casting long shadows across the room. The world outside seemed calm, but inside her, everything was unraveling. The wedding she had dreamed about had turned into a day filled with questions, secrets, and unexpected strangers. Alexander had stepped in at the altar, promising protection, but the truth still hovered like a storm cloud, waiting to break. Her phone buzzed softly. A message from Alexander appeared. Asterisk, "I'm here if you need to talk." Asterisk, she hesitated before replying, unsure if she was ready to confront the tangled mess of emotions she felt. But part of her knew she couldn't keep running from the truth forever. Later that evening, Alexander arrived at Emma's home. He carried himself with the same calm confidence she had seen at the wedding, but now there was a softness in his eyes, as if he carried the weight of her heartbreak alongside his own burdens. They sat together in the quiet living room, the silence between them heavy but not uncomfortable. "I want to tell you everything," Alexander began, his voice steady but gentle. "James isn't the man you think he is anymore. His family, they lost everything. And James, he's been trying to protect you from that." Emma's heart clenched at the thought of the man she loved hiding such a devastating secret. "Why didn't he tell me?" she asked, voice trembling. "Why let me stand there at the altar, waiting for a man who wasn't there?" Alexander sighed deeply. He was scared of losing you, of shattering your dreams. Sometimes, people make choices to shield those they love, even if it means hurting them in the short term. Tears welled in Emma's eyes, the betrayal and compassion fighting inside her. "And you? Why did you take his place? Why would a stranger step into something so personal?" Alexander looked away briefly before meeting her gaze again. "Because sometimes we're called to do things we never expected. I've lost people I cared about. I know what it's like to feel helpless. When James reached out, I couldn't say no. Protecting you felt like the right thing to do." Emma studied him, seeing not just the stranger who replaced her groom, but a man who understood pain and sacrifice. The boundaries between them blurred, not in romance yet, but in trust. For the first time since the wedding, she felt a flicker of hope. Days turned into weeks. Emma found herself seeking Alexander's counsel more often, his calm presence a balm to her chaotic thoughts. He shared stories of his own struggles and losses, each one deepening their connection. And though she still longed for James, Emma began to realize that sometimes love wasn't about fairy tale endings, but about who stands with you when everything falls apart. One afternoon, as they walked through the blooming gardens of the estate, Alexander stopped and looked at her. "There's something I haven't told you yet," he said quietly. "James's troubles go deeper than just financial ruin. There are people who want to make sure he never recovers. People who will stop at nothing." Emma's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Alexander's eyes darkened with resolve. Enemies? Old family rivals. They see James's downfall as their victory. That's why he disappeared. Not just to protect you, but to stay out of their reach. Fear mingled with her growing trust. This was no longer just a story about a broken engagement. It was a dangerous game with real stakes. Emma swallowed hard but nodded. Then we need a plan. Together. Alexander smiled faintly. I thought you'd say that. As the sun set behind the horizon, casting a warm glow over the estate, Emma and Alexander stood side by side. Two unlikely allies facing a future filled with uncertainty. The path ahead was dangerous, but they would face it together. Because sometimes love isn't about perfect moments. It's about standing strong when the world tries to tear you apart. And that kind of love was worth fighting for. Emma sat silently in the grand library of the estate, the heavy oak shelves casting long shadows in the fading light. Alexander's words echoed in her mind, danger lurking closer than she had imagined. The truth about James's enemies unsettled her deeply. Who were these people? What did they want? And how far would they go to keep James down? Alexander entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of tea. He placed one beside her and took a seat across from her. We can't let fear control us, he said firmly. But we need to be smart. This isn't just about business rivals, it's personal. Emma nodded, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. How do we protect James? And ourselves? Alexander's gaze hardened. First, we gather information. Find out who's behind this and what their next move will be. I have contacts who owe me favors. We'll use every resource. The plan they began to form was intricate and dangerous, but Emma found a strange comfort in the collaboration. For the first time since the wedding, she felt like she was fighting back instead of being helpless. Alexander's confidence steadied her, even as uncertainty loomed. Days turned into nights filled with whispered phone calls, secret meetings, and coded messages. Alexander moved like a shadow, pulling strings behind the scenes. Emma watched, learning the harsh realities that came with the world James had belonged to. It was far from the fairy tale she once believed in. One evening, Emma received a cryptic message on her phone. Asterisk, meet me at the old pier. Midnight. Alone. Asterisk, her heart pounded with fear and curiosity. Was it a trap? A warning? Or a chance to uncover the truth? Despite her hesitation, Emma knew she couldn't ignore it. She called Alexander, who insisted on accompanying her. But Emma shook her head. This is something I need to do alone. If I don't go, I'll never know what's really going on. Alexander reluctantly agreed, but made her promise to be careful. Trust your instincts, he warned. And if anything feels wrong, leave immediately. The night was thick with fog as Emma approached the deserted pier. The wooden boards creaked beneath her feet, and the cold wind whispered secrets she couldn't quite grasp. Shadows danced between the beams, and every step felt heavier than the last. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness, a man with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor. You shouldn't be here, he said quietly. Emma squared her shoulders. I need answers. Who are you? What do you want from James? The man studied her for a moment, then spoke. I'm here to warn you. The people chasing James are more dangerous than you think. They've been watching you both, waiting for a mistake. Fear surged through Emma's veins. What kind of mistake? Any slip-up could put you in the crosshairs, he said grimly. You're tangled in a game far bigger than love or money. Emma swallowed hard. How do we stop them? The man handed her a small envelope. Inside is everything you need. But be careful. Trust no one. Before she could respond, footsteps echoed behind her. Emma turned to see a shadow vanish into the fog. Panic flared, and she clutched the envelope tightly, retreating back toward the safety of the estate. When she returned, Alexander was waiting anxiously. Without hesitation, she handed him the envelope. Together, they opened it, revealing documents that painted a chilling picture of betrayal, hidden debts, and dangerous alliances. Alexander's eyes darkened as he scanned the papers. This changes everything. We're deeper in this than we thought. Emma took a deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead. The path to truth was tangled with shadows, but with Alexander by her side, she knew they could face whatever came next. Because sometimes the strongest love is the one forged in the fire of danger, and the courage to fight back. The documents lay spread out on the polished table, each revealing layers of deceit that stretched far beyond James's immediate troubles. Emma's hands trembled as she traced the names and numbers that linked their lives to a web of greed and vengeance. The quiet room felt charged, as if the secrets themselves held their breath, waiting for the next move. Alexander leaned over the papers, his expression grim but determined. "This is a battle we didn't choose, but it's one we have to win. These people won't stop until they've destroyed James and anyone close to him." Emma met his gaze, fire igniting behind her eyes. "Then we fight. But how? We're outnumbered and outgunned." Alexander nodded. "We start by exposing their schemes. Public pressure can be a weapon, but we need solid evidence and a plan to protect James and you while we do it." Emma's thoughts raced. The life she'd envisioned, the love she believed in, all seemed to hang in the balance. But something stronger was growing inside her, a resolve that refused to be broken by betrayal or fear. Over the following days, Emma and Alexander worked tirelessly. They met with trusted allies, sifted through financial records, and reached out to journalists who could shine a light on the darkness threatening their world. Each step brought new challenges: threatening phone calls, mysterious surveillance, and the ever-present danger of betrayal from within. One evening, as they pored over a particularly damning report, Emma's phone buzzed. An anonymous message flashed: "Asterisk, you're closer than you think. Stop digging or face the consequences." Asterisk. Her heart pounded, but she refused to back down. "We're not scared," she told Alexander. "If they think threats will stop us, they're wrong." Alexander squeezed her hand. "Good, because this is just the beginning." The tension mounted, but so did their determination. Emma found unexpected strength in the partnership she had forged with Alexander, a man who had stepped into her life when she needed him most, not as a replacement for James, but as a guardian of truth. Then came the breakthrough. A whistleblower from inside the rival faction reached out, offering crucial evidence that could topple the conspiracy. The meeting was set in a secluded cafe, shadows and whispered warnings surrounding the exchange. Emma's nerves fluttered, but she stayed focused. The documents handed over were more than enough to expose the villains. It was a victory, but also a beacon that would draw their enemies closer. Back at the estate, they prepared for the inevitable fallout. Security was tightened, trusted friends were alerted, and plans were made to reveal the truth to the world. As Emma stood by the window, watching the storm gather on the horizon, she felt the weight of everything they had endured. The road had been treacherous, but the fight was far from over. Alexander joined her silently, his presence a steady anchor. "Whatever happens next," he said softly, "we face it together." Emma nodded, the promise of solidarity giving her courage. In a world where love was tested by fire, they had forged a bond unbreakable. And as the first drops of rain began to fall, washing the world clean, Emma knew they were ready, not just to survive, but to reclaim the future they deserved. The day of reckoning arrived with a gray sky heavy over the estate. Emma stood at the window, watching as guests and journalists gathered, the air buzzing with anticipation. The truth they had uncovered was about to be laid bare. No more secrets, no more shadows. Alexander stood beside her, calm but alert. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. Emma took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle into a strange sense of clarity. "I am. It's time." The press conference was held in the Grand Hall, the same place that had once echoed with wedding vows now filled with murmurs of tension and curiosity. Emma stepped forward, clutching the documents that had become both their shield and sword. She began to speak, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "For too long, lies and deceit have threatened to destroy the people I care about. Today we expose the truth." As she unveiled the evidence, the room grew silent, the faces of those who once smiled at her wedding replaced by shock and disbelief. The rival faction schemes were exposed, fraudulent deals, threats, and a plot to ruin James. James, who had been watching quietly from the sidelines, stepped forward, his face lined with regret and resolve. "I failed to tell you everything," he admitted. "But I'm here now, ready to make things right." Emma looked at him, pain and forgiveness mingling in her eyes. "It's not just about the past anymore. It's about the future, and we'll face it together." Alexander smiled faintly, the man who had stepped into a stranger's role, now standing as an unwavering ally. In the weeks that followed, justice began to take its course. The corrupt were investigated, their influence crumbled, and James started the slow process of rebuilding his life and reputation. Emma and Alexander's bond deepened, built on trust, resilience, and the trials they had endured together. One evening, as they walked through the garden where the wedding had almost been, Emma turned to Alexander. "You changed everything. Not just that day, but every day since." Alexander took her hand, his eyes reflecting the warmth of a new beginning. Sometimes, the most unexpected moments lead to the strongest connections. Emma smiled, feeling a peace she hadn't known in months. The billionaire groom who swapped the vows had become more than a stand-in. He was a partner, a friend, and perhaps something more. The past had tested them, but it had also brought them together in a way neither had anticipated. And as the sun set behind the estate, casting a golden glow over the gardens, Emma knew their story was only just beginning.